Hey everyone, we are here today to talk about PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, and how they can help us at our school. A positive behavioral intervention support is an implementation of framework that maximizes evidence-based practices and interventions along with a multi-tiered continuum that supports academic, social, emotional, and behavioral competence of all students. It's a multi-tiered problem-solving approach. It's not a curriculum or a multi-packaged approach. It is individualized based on school and classroom. It emphasizes on a continuum of support for all students, and it evaluates and implements the outcomes of these supports by using data and decision making and how to improve the implementation and how it affects each student. It is a very individualized approach. It is a three-tiered system of support. There's a primary prevention that is about 80% of the students, a secondary prevention, which is about 10 to 15% of the students, and a tertiary prevention that is about 5% of the students. The tertiary prevention is a highly individualized intervention, intense intervention. The Tier 1 interventions represent about 80% of the students. It serves as a foundation that the other tiers are built upon. It uses data practices that impact everyone across the settings in the Tier 1 settings, and it establishes a foundation for delivering regular proactive supports. Tier 1 supports must be highly efficient and logical, and must be integrated with all other elements of the environment. Tier 1 focuses on establishing a school-wide positive culture and uses a system to reinforce those expectations. The elements of PBIS develop a continuum of scientifically based behavior, social, emotional, academic interventions, and supports. It uses data heavily to determine how the interventions are implemented and what interventions are implemented. It teaches and encourages social skills and behaviors and implements evidence-based behavioral practices with fidelity and accountability. Screen universally and monitor the student's performance. Tier 1 interventions, some examples are intervention matrix, active brain breaks, token economy, and verbal specific praise. We'll go over a couple of these. We're going to talk a little bit about school-wide and classroom-wide positive behavioral supports and kind of what the difference is. So school-wide is for the entire school. An example of a school-wide PBIS intervention would be a matrix, and pick something from the matrix that you're having problems with. So in our school, we're having problems with dress code and people being late for school. So we're going to address those two issues. So anyone who doesn't come in with a dress code infraction or come into school late for the first term will receive a pop and chip party or pizza party at the end of the term. So that's going to entice some of the students to show up in dress code and show up on time. The school-wide ensures consistency across different contexts in the classroom, the lunchroom, and the restrooms. The teachers develop an understanding of appropriate discipline for appropriate behaviors, and the goals are consistent with school-wide implementation to decrease problem behaviors, office referrals, suspensions, increase student engagement, attendance, and safety. Ideally, class-wide positive behavioral supports run concurrently with school-wide behavioral supports, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you might have some teachers that want to implement it, but the school's not behind them. So in that case, they're going to do a classroom-wide, and it's going to be specific to the classroom. They're going to use management practices and systems to ensure fidelity and sustainability, and data to guide the decision making and to monitor the effectiveness of the students and the social outcomes. It's very individualized, so if a classroom is having problems with disruptions, it might be different than a classroom that is having problems with students biting. It would be different interventions. The intervention matrix sets clear expectations of the rules that need to be followed, and it's going to have a list of the places these rules are to be followed and what's expected of the students. It can be used class-wide or school-wide, depending on what is going on and what behaviors we're trying to decrease. It teaches students how to follow the rules and encourages positive student interaction, and it promotes learning. I've added an example of a school-wide matrix. This one just goes through being prepared and ready, being responsible. Sorry, it's a little hard to read. Having integrity and disciplined and excellent and safe. And then it goes on how you can display these behaviors in certain areas of the school. Some important things to consider is how are we going to get teachers to buy into this? If you're not going to get a teacher to buy into it, it's not going to work because the teacher's not going to try to implement it. Same thing with students. What is the student wanting to work towards? So you could implement a survey. So if you wanted to do it school-wide, you could do a Google Doc and have the students fill out what they would like to work towards. What incentivizes them? What are they willing to work towards? The teachers, if you can provide evidence-based studies to show the teachers how this works, you can get them to buy into that. The targeted behaviors that we want to decrease. What is the focus? Are we trying to decrease disruptions? Are we trying to decrease tardies? Are we trying to decrease kids just staying on task and doing their work? And how are we going to incentivize that? What motivates them? So again, doing a survey, just simply asking, if you're doing it at a class, asking the class, poll it, what do we want to work towards today? And then we're going to do we're going to do data, We need to track the data. Are these interventions working? And how we determine that is we track it with data, and then we assess the data, and we reassess the data, and we make informed decisions about that data. So something you need to consider is who's going to collect the data. If you're in the classroom, you're going to have the teacher collect the data, or if you have a student teacher that can help collect data on this tier to decrease the behaviors. And we're going to assess and review and assess and review as needed. Have monthly meetings. You can have a team to go over the data. So another intervention is active brain breaks. So an active brain break is allowing the students to get up and move around the class. So if you're having students in your classroom, some have ADHD and they just have a really hard time sitting still. This would be a really good intervention for those students. They can get up in a fun type of way and kind of get a break. It helps this one really helps students who struggle with sitting still. And it engages them in a game that usually lasts around 10 minutes. And it promotes productivity, decreases behaviors, and it's very easy and inexpensive to implement. I've added some examples of brain breaks that can be used in a classroom or school. So how you would do it in a classroom is you could have a dance party in the classroom. Just you get up and have a freeze dance. So play a little bit of music and then stop the music and have them freeze. And you could do that. You could also do that in assembly to try and get kids pumped up for school-wide positive behavioral supports. Have a big dance party and make it fun and tell them all the things that they can earn by behaving and following the rules. Silent ball was another example that I had on here. You can throw the ball to the students and everyone has to be quiet. So you'll throw the ball to someone and they catch it and they can't let the ball hit the floor, but they can't talk either. Go Noodle has a website that has a whole bunch of videos that kids can move and jump around and play games with. And some resources here for some brain breaks. There's a couple of books that I've added. Token economy is my tier 1 intervention, and a token economy is just designed to have the students work towards something it's using a system that's structured so that you can track it. So we're tracking the expectations of the student. Today we are going to finish all of our assignments. We're not going to cause disruptions, and each class that this student doesn't display those behaviors, they get to have a token put on there. So I've added here, there's a token board. Again, you can do this school-wide or classroom-wide. So I've added an example of a token board. Today I'm going to work towards, have the student choose what they want to work towards, and then give them a token for each time that they've done what they need to do. Expectations will be set first. There's also, you can have a homework pass. If you go all day without displaying this target behavior, then you can have a homework pass so that you don't have to do your homework tonight. And again, finding rewards that the student wants to work towards. I have added a resource here on how to create a token board. This one's a digital token board, so that if a student has a tablet and they, a lot of kids have Chromebooks, you can have a digital one and the teacher can put the tokens on the token board throughout the day. Verbal specific praise. This was a tier 1 intervention that I really liked because I think teachers don't often praise students enough. We get focused on the negative behaviors, and positive behavioral intervention supports focuses a lot on positive behaviors. So this one is making sure that you're praising your students enough and to acknowledge the desired behaviors that you're looking for. It's a highly effective strategy, increases positive behaviors while decreasing inappropriate behaviors. I have a list, so I think it's really cool if we could get teachers to post them up in their classroom and just glance over at it once in a while and focus on a student that's behaving well and be positive about that student. Say something positive about that student. Hey, Alex, I really like the way that you are working in your seat and you're being nice and quiet. Here's a book here about the power of praise and how it empowers students. Tier 2 interventions are for about 15% of the students. These are for students who aren't successful with tier 1 supports alone. So you're focusing on the students who are at risk. These are smaller group interventions who that focus on students who demonstrate at-risk behaviors. This is intensifying your tier 1 strategies, and the school should have a team of people who have expertise in the areas of behaviors and education. Again, data collection is really important, and assessing the evidence-based practices. How are they doing? Is this working? They need to plan and implement the strategies, provide and review weekly data, and make decisions about tier 2 supports. So tier 2 supports were right in the middle. A couple of examples I have are behavior contracts, breaks are better, and check-in and check-out systems. Behavior contract is you're defining a specific behavior and a specific reward with the student. You are drawing up a contract that's collaborative. You are agreeing on what this contract expectations are and what the student is going to receive for a reward. The contract will be made up, and everything will be defined in the contract, and the contract will need to be signed. I have included an example of a behavior contract, and it should be reviewed every month, every other month, depending on how the student's doing or what the behavior is, and you will agree with the student on that. Below, I've also added an example of how to make a behavior contract, and this is a good example to use for parents at home that are struggling with their children, and how to do a behavior contract with their children at home. Breaks are better is designed to give an escape to students who are struggling in the classroom. I generalized this based on I work in a high school. So the high school would be if a student is struggling with one specific teacher, we could have a break pass, and that student could just flash the break pass and the teacher will nod and then have a designed area for the student to go and calm down. This will teach the student to become more aware of their emotions and able to calm down to avoid a problematic behavior from arising. The student will have a designated amount of time, and there will be a specific person that the student will go to in the event that they have to go and take a break, and that person will let the teacher know that they're coming. And it should also be tracked to ensure that the student is not taking advantage of the situation so that the student can get out of school all the time. I have used this strategy quite a bit and have found that students decrease anxiety just knowing that they can get out of the class if they need to. A lot of the students that display the behaviors because they need to get out of class, they need to escape, and oftentimes it's because they're anxious or upset about something and just need a place to calm down. I have also included an implementation manual for Breaks Are Better. This was a really interesting resource I thought was beneficial. I just included a little pass you could, for an example that the student could use. And the check-in, check-out is a method to use with students there with a coordinator, or you're going to have a designated person that the student reports to every day. So the student's going to come in and check in with the coordinator or the counselor. The counselor will ask how they're doing. If the student is struggling that morning, the counselor will go over some coping mechanisms, some strategies to calm down, to kind of get in a better mood to start the day. And then they will go to class. And they're going to get periodic feedback throughout the day with their teacher. And the teacher will give them feedback. And then at the end of the day, the student's going to come back to the counselor and meet with the coordinator to discuss the goals. Were their goals for the day met? So in that morning meeting, they're going to go over what's the expectations for today. And then in the afternoon, they're going to go over if their goals were met or not. Then the counselor will send home some feedback to the parents about how the day went. And this provides help to students with behavioral needs. It promotes accountability and independence, so the student is able to recognize their behaviors, and they can talk to the counselor in the morning about the things that are going on throughout the day, and the counselor can help them throughout the day, help them to get through the day. I've included a check-in, check-out data point sheet. The teacher each period will go through and check off how that student did. And at the end of the day, if the student has done everything that they needed to do, the counselor can provide the student with a reward. Here is a book on the check-in, check-out intervention. Tier 3 interventions are intense individualized behavioral supports that are geared towards students who are unresponsive to Tier 1 and 2. The supports can also be used for students that are too severe for Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports. And the team will decide, after reviewing data, which students require the Tier 3 interventions, and that's usually about 5% of students. So these stem from strong foundations from Tier 1 and Tier 2, and with those tiers in place, the schools are free to organize individualized teams to support students with more intense behaviors. So a Tier 3 intervention, I've added a few here, and then we'll just talk about a couple of them. Functional behavioral analysis, an FBA, behavioral intervention plan, BIP, social skills intervention, and self-monitoring. We're going to talk a little bit about functional behavioral analysis and behavioral intervention plan. An FBA is a series of observations and data collection that identifies the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. What is going on before this behavior happens? What is the behavior? Define the behavior. And what's the consequence? What is the child getting out of the displaying this behavior? So once you're able to determine that, you can identify why the behaviors are occurring. So you're creating a hypothesis. I think the child is doing this because every time they display this behavior, they're getting attention from peers. So you're determining interventions to eliminate the behavior problems. We're getting rid of that antecedent to try to prevent the behavior from occurring. We're trying to change that consequence. So a behavior plan is written generally after an FBA has been conducted. And the goal of it is to help the student who's struggling to behave in class. It's designed to stop the problem behaviors, and you can use rewards to encourage the student to display more positive behaviors. The plan provides teachers and other school staff with a clear set of behavioral goals, along with evidence-based practices to help the child achieve those goals. So I've added an example of an FBA. This is one that I've used Insights to Behavior and I have it as a resource. You do have to pay for it, but if your school will pay for it, it does help you, guide you along to do an FBA, and then it helps you pull out a behavior plan from that FBA. So it defines what type of behavior it is. Is it classroom disruption? Is it an elopement? What is the behavior? So define the behavior, what it looks like, how intense is this behavior, and how often is it occurring? How frequent is it? What are the setting events, the antecedents, the consequences, the behaviors, and what are the students' goals? So I have Insights to Behavior as a resource, and then I also have this book, Conducting School-Based Functional Behavioral Assessments, as well as another way that you can figure out how to write a behavior plan. Some other helpful resources that I've come up with are some websites. There's a video here for self-monitoring, which I have as a tier 3 intervention. You can use that as a tier 2 intervention. It again depends on what the behavior is. So I have an active play learning brain break guide and an educational journal here that compares check-in check-out to breaks or better. Some benefits of PBIS. This was a really cool educational journal, and it talked about what happens in schools after PBIS was implemented. And I think there was about 4 to 5 schools that displayed these positive things that had happened. They had increase in parent-teacher conferences. They had increased student engagement, increased student attendance, student performance increased, and the engaging families increased. So I thought that was really cool. That would be a great way to get teachers to buy in. These textbooks have been a great resource. If anyone would like to borrow them, they are more than welcome. I have them available in my office, so if you would like to come and borrow them. And that concludes my presentation. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.